Hello and welcome to the Spiritist Moment. My name is Leonardo Vieira.
And I'm Kirsten DeMello.
Tonight we have a very interesting topic to talk about. Love your enemy, chapter 12 of the book, The Gospel According to Spiritism. This chapter, very importantly, goes through different topics or different parts of it that talks about rendering good for evil, discarnate enemies. If someone strikes your right cheek, offer the other side also. And then the Spiritist teachings talking about vengeance, hatred, and dueling. When we talk about love your enemies, it's very hard for us to understand this because sometimes, very seldom, we love the ones near us, the ones that are in contact with us on a daily basis. So let's try to dive into this and try to get some understanding that the Spiritism brings to us. Kirsten, love your enemies. Let's talk about this. How is this feeling towards others who have hurt us?
Absolutely, Leo. The concept of love is so broad in a sense that the human language doesn't suffice to truly explain the diversity of emotions that we have in life, right? Because we use the term so sparingly and also loosely and for many things. For instance, you say, I love cake, I love my husband, I love this car, but the meaning is not the same. So likewise, we can say and reflect what Kardec says in this particular chapter, that when Jesus said, love your enemies, it's logical sense that you're not going to love your enemy the same way that you love, let's say, your spouse, who you might adore, your child, who you have a great relationship with. Those that offend you, you're not going to have the same reaction when you see them. And Kardec explains why, the mechanism, which is really key for us to say, oh, that makes sense. When he talks about the law of assimilation of fluids, when he says that people that have these negative thoughts towards us, they emit this fluid around us, and it affects us. Being the fact that Kardec also talks of the other books in the codification, he says we're all mediums to some extent or another. And he says that we will suffer the effects of these fluids. So it's almost impossible, in a way, to have good feelings towards those that do us harm because of this fluidic assimilation that happens. We react to it. It's almost natural in a sense, according to law. So we understand that we're not going to have this normal reaction, right, Leo? So,
yes, in this case, then what you're saying is that it's a completely different feeling that we have towards the ones that we like or that we live together against those that will do something against, towards us or against us. The same way that you talk about this fluid. I mean, a knowledge that we could take here. Someone is trying to strike you or trying to throw something at you, automatically, even physically speaking, you're going to react to it, and you will have you will try to defend yourself. And I think we're still in that defense mode, trying to put ourselves, trying to play the old man inside of us in many situations, and we react to it completely different. And we sometimes, the fluid that you talk about as well, we observe it and we react in the same mode, in the same note with those individuals, again, reacting. And this is due as well, as Spiritism brings to us, based on our old behaviors, on selfishness, pride, that always tells us, what, you have to react. You have to be the man. You have to be the person that is reacting. Now, we have a basic understanding on this idea of loving him, that we know that it's not the same thing. Right. It's not exactly the same thing. But trying to practice forgiveness, trying to be benevolent, trying to be indulgent towards that person. But let's talk about the next part of it, that is the discarnate spirits. Why is Kardec bring this idea of discarnate enemies?
Well, because we know that we have enemies, first of all, on the other side that are in the spiritual realm that can affect us. And also, as Spiritists, we know that the death of the physical body is not the end of all things. That when our physical body dies, we go on to the other side with the same ill will and sentiments towards our quote-unquote enemy. So at some point, we have to deal with it. If not in this life, then in the next life. And that as Spiritists, we have this knowledge, and it's a great responsibility, although perhaps maybe we don't think about it in day-to-day when we have these little spats with people, whether it's our boss or customers that come into our bank. or people that we just encounter in day-to-day life. We don't think much of it, but we imprint, you know, in them things. For instance, Chico shares a story when he was very late going to work one day, and he was rushing, and a woman stopping him saying, Chico, Chico, I need your help. And he was like, oh, I want to go, I need to go to work. But Emmanuel said, no, no, go back and help her. So he goes, helps her real quick, and then the woman thanks and thank you, Chico, and then Chico goes and starts running again to rush to work because he's running late. And then Emmanuel says, Chico, turn around. And it's when he turns around that he sees this fluid emanating out of this woman, and it's beautiful. And she's sort of like sending him this beautiful fluid. And then he's reflecting with Emmanuel, and think if you didn't stop to help her, what fluid she would be emitting. So when we think about our discarnate enemies or our incarnate enemies, or those we do wrong to, or those who do wrong towards us, these fluids exist. So as Spiritists, we have to acknowledge this life after death, that the physical death does not end all things. It's merely just a part of the cycle, right, Leo?
Very important, very important. And you brought a very interesting topic that this chapter goes in depth into it. That is this idea that us, you know, individuals who consider the Spiritist science in our hearts, it's very important for us to look at these aspects, the aspect of the incarnated minds, the discarnated minds, as well as our past, our present, and our future as well. That, you know, what we're reaping right now perhaps is a product of something that we, you know, planted in the past, and what we do now, it's going to impact our future. Just as you brought this example from with Chico. So it's very important for us to take this as, you know, with a different mind, with a different heart, that these are opportunities that we have in our lives right now. Perhaps if somebody does something wrong towards us, to not only exercise this feeling of loving our enemies, love these situations in our lives, but also, you know, that will be a teaching for these other individuals, because they're going to look at it and say, you know what, he didn't react. So perhaps when they go through the same trial or tribulation, they will do likewise. Hopefully, we can expect people to do the same thing, but hopefully it will be a teaching to all of us. And let's just now try to exemplify to our friends, to our listeners, you know, what is this idea of giving the other side of our face?
And this is a really interesting concept, because so many times we think, well, what did Jesus mean when he says if someone smacks you on one cheek, show them the other? And we think, oh, well, what about my pride? Or what if someone's trying to kill me? Should I allow them to kill me? No.
Where's the law of preservation?
Where's the law of preservation in all this? But Kardec clearly states in Spirit's book, talking about the chapter on laws, when he says the law of preservation. No, self-preservation comes from the animal kingdom. We need to preserve ourselves. That's okay. But what Jesus said, showing the other cheek, is something else. Now, what he explains is showing another part of ourself that is good. Showing to that person, like, okay, you may have offended me, you may have hit me or tried to hurt me, but I'm going to show you a better side. That is the opposite side of what Jesus meant, according to Kardec's interpretation and in the interpretations from the spirits, when they say showing the better part of you to that person. Because we are no different from animals if we react. If someone steps in our shoe and we punch them or we hit them, we're reacting like animals.
Right.
So
that's what a dog would do, is step on their foot, they would bite us.
Yeah, they would. So are we no better than animals? It's something for us to reflect on. We are. We should be. We need to develop this within us and not react, but act. Instead of when someone comes to either physically assault you or emotionally, instead of reacting with a comment to defend your so-called pride, you can act. And as many examples we've seen with Jesus, with Chico, with Givaldo sharing stories, we can say to him or her, my brother, why did you do this?
Right.
Why did you do this? You know, when Jesus tells the story, when one of his disciples went to pull his sword out to defend Jesus, and Jesus said, put away your sword. Those that live by the sword die by the sword. So we have to think about how we act, how we're thinking, because it can either make our lives hell or make our lives heaven, depending upon how we act.
Most certainly. Thank you. Thank you. And just so we can wrap this up, talking about the Spiritist teachings, and when the Spirit actually brings to us, and we invite everyone to read these passages, we're talking about vengeance, hatred, and dueling, and it's very interesting how the Spirit guide us to change ourselves, just as you're saying, to show the better side of ourselves, and to lose the old customs that we have. When we talk about vengeance, for example, that we always wanted to preserve this old, the pride, preserve the selfishness that, okay, my parents did this way, my custom says that I have to do so and so, eye for an eye, and I keep doing the same thing. And towards the end of this chapter, we'll see that Kardec is calling us, showing that times has changed, and we see this less and less. But it's very important how we should invite ourselves, invite others to make this change. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And I think something to help wrap this up, something we should always consider is that what kind of person do we want to be? Do we want to be courageous? Do we want to be faithful to God? Because they tell us here in the literature that it takes a lot more courage to withstand an offense than it is to go and react to something. Like Kardec talks about the dueling. In our times now it doesn't exist, but back then when you would offend someone, two men would go to battle with their swords and one would try to kill the other, and that would be acceptable. And Kardec explains to us, and the good spirits explain to us, that they were greater murderers. They were much more guiltier than those who react out of an animalistic nature, because they had time to think about it. So now it's time for us to use our reason, use our knowledge to say, okay, in Spiritism we know, if you don't want to forgive your offender today, you're going to have to forgive them tomorrow. That is the law. There's no escaping it. You read any book of Andrea Luiz, almost, and it goes into different stories for us. So we need to think about this, that either now or later we have to face this. And Leo, what is it about in the Spirit's book, in the codification, when Kardec talks about benevolence and indulgence, how we should apply that in our lives, to finalize our thoughts here?
Well, certainly. What Spiritism brings to us is this idea, number one, which is very hard for us, is to try to forgive. Someone does something wrong towards us, let's try to forgive. But sometimes forgiving is very, very hard. And we let's say we live and relive the situation over and over and over. We tend to think about the person of not in so good way. So if it's hard to forgive, which is the first step, let's just then practice benevolence and towards that other person. Let's be good towards that other person. What is it? Not talking bad about the person, not saying or thinking bad things about the person, or do anything that go against God's teaching or the Christ mind towards that person. And again, if we can take that step, let's just practice indulgence towards that person. Be tolerant. And a very interesting teaching when we talk about indulgence is the following, is that looking at the other as if we're looking at ourselves. Are we perfect? We're not perfect. We still have a long, long way. So when we take that step back and say, you know what? If I'm not doing that mistake, I could be doing other mistakes, and I would wish that others would look at me the same way. So when we take that step back and we say, we're not perfect, so is not that person. Okay. And then we're relieved from this guilt feeling, or perhaps very dark feeling towards others and towards ourselves. So any final comments, anything that we can say to our listeners, to our friends?
Think before we act, and remember that we have to and should love our enemies. It is the law, and eventually we have to face it. And I'm Kirsten DeMello.
Leonardo Vieira.
And this was a Spiritist Moment.